There's a point where discipline turns into peace, when the grind stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like identity. Today, you'll see how to get there. There's a level of discipline that doesn't inspire admiration, it inspires fear. Not the fear of harm, but of reflection. When you're in the presence of someone so consistent, so relentlessly focused, so eerily unmoved by comfort or fatigue, you begin to feel the weight of your own excuses. You look at them, and it's not, "I wish I had that." It's, "What did they give up to become this?" Because to reach that level, a level where motivation becomes irrelevant and commitment becomes instinct, something inside you has to die. Have you ever seen that person? The one who never flinches? Who wakes at the same time every single day? Not because they want to, but because that's just what happens now. They show up when no one else does. They keep going when everyone else folds. While the rest fall into the familiar spiral, 3 weeks of effort, 2 weeks of excuses, and a silent surrender into mediocrity. This person operates like a machine. And when people describe them, it's always the same phrase, "That's not normal." And they're right, because it's not. This isn't a story about motivation. This isn't a step-by-step guide to trying harder. This is a revelation, a look into a centuries-old system developed in the silent halls of Zen monasteries in Japan. A system that doesn't just build discipline, it makes it irreversible. They call it Gyoji, continuous, unbroken practice. But before you begin to think this is just another productivity tactic, let's be very clear. Gyoji is not a hack. It's a form of identity death. It requires you to abandon the version of you that breaks promises. It forces you to eliminate the option of failure. It is the death of choice and the birth of certainty. This transformation is not for everyone. It begins not with action, but with awakening, a brutal confrontation with the self you've been protecting for too long. And for one man, a 34-year-old software engineer named Rafael, this confrontation came after a lifetime of starts that never turned into finishes. He had the credentials, the successful career, a sharp mind, a network of supportive peers. But beneath the surface, Rafael was hollowed out by inconsistency. The kind of inconsistency that isn't loud or dramatic, but slow and soul-dissolving. The kind you justify every time it shows up. The gym? He'd commit, then quit after 2 months. Meditation? 1 week, maybe 2. Books? He'd buy them with excitement, read 3 pages, then shove them in a drawer. The cycle was painfully familiar. Monday started with a spark of motivation. By Wednesday, his brain began negotiating. By Friday, it surrendered. Sunday brought a new set of promises. And then the wheel turned again. He tried everything. Digital habit trackers, reward systems, even accountability groups. But nothing stuck. Because what he was fighting wasn't a lack of tools. It was something much deeper. Something wired into his biology. The architecture of his own brain. Then, everything changed. One late night, lost in a YouTube rabbit hole, Rafael stumbled upon a documentary about Zen monks. It showed a monk rising before dawn, day after day, for decades, never missing a session, never hesitating. Not once. And when asked how they did it, the answer was quiet but terrifying in its simplicity. It had nothing to do with willpower. It was Gyoji, a system that dates back to the 13th century in the remote temples of Japan. A discipline so unyielding, it survived civil wars, natural disasters, and social collapse. Since 1200 AD, at exactly 3:30 a.m., a bell rings at the 𝗂𝗍 temple. And every single day since then, monks rise. Not sometimes, not most days, every day, without fail, without negotiation. Let that sink in. No monk lies in bed thinking, "Should I skip today?" That question does not exist. It's not that they're stronger, It's that they've removed the question entirely. This is the first secret Rafael would learn. Commitments are either reversible or irreversible, and most people live their lives stuck in the former. Reversible decisions are the ones you can back out of without consequence. I'll try this diet. I'll do yoga 3 times this week. They sound strong, but your brain knows the truth. These are soft commitments. They're lies dressed as goals. In contrast, an irreversible decision eliminates escape routes. A monk doesn't take on a challenge. He takes on an identity. When he takes his vows, it's not a plan, it's a declaration. Public, permanent, witnessed by a community. And once identity shifts, negotiation ends. Here's where neuroscience backs the philosophy. A Harvard neuroscientist, after 15 years of studying habit formation, made a startling discovery. The primitive brain still links public failure with danger. In tribal societies, losing status, being exposed as a liar, a quitter, or a fraud often meant exile or death. And even today, your amygdala reacts to social humiliation the same way, as a threat to survival. Rafael used this insight as a weapon. Instead of whispering silent promises into his private journal, he made a declaration, a public one, on paper, in ink, and on social media. I am a person who meditates every day at 5 a.m. for 90 days. Not I will try, not I want to. I am, he told his girlfriend. She laughed. You're being dramatic, she said. Perfect, he told co-workers. Man, this is a bit much, they said. Excellent. Every smirk, every sarcastic comment, every dismissive word became fuel. Because now, quitting came with a new cost: humiliation. Every morning, when the alarm rang and his mind whispered, "Not today," he thought of the alternative, publicly admitting, just 3 days in, that he was still that guy. The guy who couldn't follow through. This is where most systems fall short. They try to use incentives to lure you into action, but incentives fade. Shame, when used intentionally, can harden resolve. For Rafael, this wasn't shame as a weapon to tear himself down. It was pressure used like a forge. The pain of quitting had been made larger than the pain of continuing. But the battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Because even when the mind is cornered, the body still resists. Every morning was war. Muscles groaning, eyes refusing to open. The warmth of the bed seducing him back into comfort. Public declarations ended the mental negotiation, but biology was still screaming for mercy. And here, in this trench of exhaustion and rebellion, Rafael would discover the second principle of monk discipline: non-negotiable hours. Every day, millions of people lose the war against themselves, not because they lack motivation, but because they ask one fatal question: when should I do it? That single decision, the timing of a task, silently drains more energy than the task itself. The human brain, designed for efficiency, burns through glucose with every choice, no matter how small. When to eat, when to train, when to write. These questions seem harmless, but they form the fault lines of inconsistency. Rafael, still reeling from the brutal resistance of his own biology, made a decision that would shift everything. He eliminated the question of when. He chose 5 a.m., not because he was a morning person. He wasn't. He hated early mornings, just like most people. But he understood something critical. Early hours are empty. No meetings, no distractions, no emails, no excuses. The world is silent, and silence is fertile ground for discipline. By choosing 5 a.m., Rafael wasn't optimizing his productivity, he was eliminating negotiation. The first few mornings were hell. His body fought like a trapped animal. He'd wake up groggy, filled with dread, the soft whisper of comfort begging him to snooze. But he kept showing up, 5 a.m., 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 one miserable repetition at a time. Then, something strange happened. By the second week, he began waking up 2 minutes before his alarm without understanding why. His body, once his enemy, was beginning to rewire. Day 14 came, and when the alarm rang, he stood up before he even realized he'd moved. His feet hit the floor before his thoughts could intervene. It was no longer a decision. It was reflex. This is what people misunderstand about fixed hours. It's not about finding your ideal schedule. It's not about optimizing your biorhythms or hacking your circadian rhythm. That's the lie productivity culture sells you. Fixed hours are about removing time as a variable. Because when you do something at different times every day, you're asking your brain to redecide every time. And the brain, when given the chance to renegotiate, will always look for the path of least resistance. Fixed timing erases the option. But it wasn't enough. Rafael, now firmly anchored to 5 a.m., noticed a new problem creeping in through the back door. His mind had found another crack to crawl through. Though the time was fixed, the practice itself had no form. Some mornings he meditated. Other mornings he read. Occasionally he'd do push-ups. The when was locked, but the what became the new battleground. And this, as it turns out, is the third layer of discipline the monks understood centuries ago, something most modern habit systems still ignore. Dogen Zenji, the founder of the Soto school of Zen, taught not just repetition, but ritual, forms, sequences, identical movement. He believed the mind cannot fully surrender until the practice becomes boring, even absurd in its sameness. Why? Because variety is where consistency goes to die. Every time you give yourself options, even small ones, your brain must make micro-decisions. Should I do yoga or stretching? Read or journal? 10 push-ups or 20? Each of those tiny choices are cracks. Cracks through which the old self, the unreliable, inconsistent self, begins to leak back in. So Rafael locked everything down. 20 push-ups, 10 minutes of meditation, 10 minutes of reading. Same order, same timer, same sequence. No creativity, no inspiration, just repetition. He called it his personal Ango, a 90-day commitment to identical daily practice. In Zen tradition, Ango is a period of intense training lasting weeks or months, during which monks eliminate external distraction and fully immerse themselves in uninterrupted discipline. It's not about learning something new. It's about mastering sameness. But sameness isn't easy. By the third week, Rafael's mind revolted. It screamed for change. This is boring. You're not a robot. You need variety or you'll burn out. The mental negotiation shifted from when to why. It was no longer about whether to wake up, it was about whether the routine was worth it. That voice? That's the voice of survival, your brain craving novelty to keep you engaged, to protect you from mental fatigue. But novelty doesn't lead to mastery. Novelty feeds the ego, and mastery requires ego death. By week 4, something inside him broke. Not his motivation, but his resistance. The voice of negotiation didn't vanish, but it began to whisper instead of scream. He moved through his morning practice like a dancer through choreography. Not because it was easier, but because it was inevitable. By week 6, something astonishing happened. He would begin his push-ups and only realize halfway through that he'd started. No thought, no planning, no permission, just movement. The practice, the system, was now operating independently of his will. This is the point people misunderstand when they talk about discipline. Discipline isn't about waking up every day and fighting the urge to quit. That's a short-term model built on adrenaline. Real discipline is the absence of decision. It's a behavior so rehearsed, so cemented into your nervous system, that you no longer participate in it consciously. MIT researchers studying habit formation discovered that after approximately 66 days of identical repetition, the basal ganglia and the region of the brain responsible for motor functions and routine behaviors takes control. The prefrontal cortex, where decisions and willpower live, goes quiet. The action becomes automated. It's no longer something you do. It's something you are. But the system still had one final enemy to face, the enemy that destroys almost every transformation: life. On day 35, Rafael caught the flu. On day 40, he was sent across the country for a surprise work trip. No gym, no quiet space, no perfect conditions. This is the point where most people fail. Not because they lack strength, but because they expect perfection. They've built their system on ideal days, not real ones. This is where gaps destroy progress. You miss one day, then justify missing another. I'm sick. I'm traveling. I'll start fresh Monday. But perfection is not the point. Continuity is. This is the final truth in the Gyoji system. When the practice breaks, even once the mind uses that gap to invite the old self back in, and once it returns, it never leaves quietly. But Rafael was ready, because what came next wasn't willpower. It was understanding. The greatest myth ever sold about discipline is that it requires perfection, that if you miss a day, the streak is broken and the entire system collapses. But that's not how real consistency works. The monks who developed Gyoji didn't operate in a vacuum. They weren't immune to disaster, sickness, or change. Earthquakes destroyed temples. Wars ravaged their countryside. Famine, fire, floods, and yet the practice continued, not perfectly, but without a gap. This is what Rafael came to understand. Perfection is not the goal. Continuity is. On day 40, Rafael was jet-lagged, sick, and traveling. His schedule was destroyed, his body wrecked. The perfect storm of excuses had arrived. No quiet place to meditate, no gym, no sacred space. Every condition he had used to support his discipline was now stripped away. This is the moment where most fall, because they haven't made a critical distinction, the difference between rest and retreat. Elite athletes have rest days. Monks rest too, but their rest is intentional, strategic, never reactive, never impulsive. When they rest, it is because resting will serve the practice. But most people don't rest, they retreat. They give up under the illusion of self-care. Rafael understood this, so he didn't skip. He adapted. Push-ups in an airport bathroom, meditation in the back seat of an Uber, reading a page from a printed screenshot on his phone. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't powerful, it wasn't even effective in the traditional sense. But it was continuous. The flow didn't stop. And that's when something shifted, not just inside him, but in how others perceived him. Co-workers began to notice something different. He was more focused, more alert, quieter in his confidence. Friends called him obsessive. His girlfriend said half-jokingly, "This isn't healthy." And that was the moment Rafael smiled, because he knew, when people start questioning your consistency, you're on the right path. The line between obsession and transformation is thin, razor thin. And the people who have never crossed it will always try to pull you back. They'll say you need balance. They'll warn you not to burn out. But what they're really saying is, you're making me uncomfortable. Slow down so I can feel better. Rafael didn't slow down. He doubled down. And this leads to one of the most powerful ideas from the Gyoji system, an idea rarely discussed outside the monasteries. Pre-solutions. In the West, we react to problems. We wait until a crisis hits, then try to summon the will to overcome it. But by the time a challenge arrives, your cognitive load is already overwhelmed. Stress takes over, and in that state, you will always choose the path of least resistance. The monks don't do this. They pre-decide. When the meditation hall floods, they move to the dining hall. If the dining hall burns, they sit in the courtyard. The bell rings. Practice continues. There is no meeting, no panic, no decision-making, only execution. Rafael adopted the same mindset. He made a list of every obstacle that had ever derailed him in the past: sickness, house guests, late work nights, mental exhaustion. And for each one, he wrote down a pre-solved response. If I'm sick, I'll do 2 push-ups, 1-minute meditation, 1 page of reading. If I'm staying with others, I'll work out silently in the bathroom. If I'm hungover, which shouldn't happen, but I will do something, no matter how small. Each situation had a predetermined response. No emotion, no self-judgment, just execution. The power here isn't just logistical, it's neurological. A behavioral psychologist at Yale University found that when we pre-decide our responses to potential stressors, we reduce decision fatigue significantly. The prefrontal cortex, your center of willpower and logic, is preserved. You're no longer using energy to decide, you're using energy to do. This changed everything for Rafael. By day 70, his practice had become automatic. He'd wake up, and his body would begin the sequence before his conscious mind even caught up. He stopped tracking the days. The practice was no longer something he maintained, it was something that maintained itself. His girlfriend's mother came to visit for a week. Rafael still did push-ups in the bathroom at 5 a.m. every day, not because he wanted to, but because he had become someone who doesn't negotiate. That's the transformation no one talks about. People think consistency means you push through discomfort, that you battle daily with laziness and win. But that's just the first stage. The true transformation happens when there is no longer a war to fight. You don't argue with the voice in your head because it doesn't speak anymore. The identity that once sabotaged your progress has died. This is the moment the ancient Zen monks wait for. When the practice becomes so internalized, so ritualized, that the practitioner disappears into the act. There is no more meditator, only meditation. No more disciplined man, only discipline. Rafael reached day 90. His personal 𝗓𝗀𝗀 was complete. 3 months of identical, uninterrupted, non-negotiable practice. The ritual had carved itself into his biology, his nervous system, and his sense of self. And yet, even then, the milestone wasn't the reward. It was the transformation that had occurred quietly, invisibly in the background, like tectonic plates shifting slowly beneath your feet. And when people saw him leaner, quieter, more alert, they didn't say, "You've improved." They said, "You've changed." One friend said something Rafael would never forget. "Your consistency is, honestly, kind of scary." To which Rafael replied, without hesitation, "Good. Because when your discipline begins to disturb the comfort of others, you are finally operating at the right level. Discipline that makes others uncomfortable is discipline that works. When your behavior becomes a mirror one that reflects back to others their own missed commitments, their own fragile routine, they flinch. They mock. They criticize. They call you obsessive, robotic, extreme. But what they're really saying is, your consistency makes me confront my own lack of it. And that's when you know you've crossed a threshold most people never reach. Rafael had entered what the monks refer to as formless form, a state where the repetition of structure becomes so internalized, so instinctive, that it no longer feels like a practice. It simply is. Like breathing, like walking. There's no celebration, no craving, no applause. Just quiet momentum. But this transformation, while powerful, isn't magic. It's not even spiritual in nature. It's neurobiological. When behavior becomes this consistent, the basal ganglia, your brain's automation center, takes over completely. That means every cue, every action, every reward is processed without conscious effort. It's the same system that drives you to check your phone without thinking or to crave sugar at 3 p.m. The difference is, you've hijacked it for discipline. And here's the truth that nobody wants to admit. Most people don't want to be that consistent. Because real consistency requires death. Not the death of your body, but the death of your identity. To become someone who trains without fail, who meditates without exception, who works without mood or motivation, you must kill the version of yourself that's addicted to comfort, variety, and emotional permission. That's what Zen monk Dogen meant when he wrote, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." When Rafael finished his 90-day 𝗓𝗀𝗀, he wasn't proud in the way most people might expect. He didn't throw a celebration. He didn't post a thread about it on social media. He didn't reward himself with a cheat day, because the point was never to reach day 90. The point was to become someone who could no longer not do the work. And that's the core of the Gyoji system. You don't do the practice. The practice becomes you. It's not a program. It's not a challenge. It's not even a habit. It's a rebirth. The world teaches you that change happens slowly, through positive reinforcement, gradual progress, and self-love. But that's only partially true. Real change, fundamental identity change happens when you draw a line in the sand and declare, "The person I used to be is gone. This is who I am now." That's what Rafael did the moment he made his public declaration. He wasn't hoping to build a new habit. He was making the old version of himself uninhabitable. And here's what makes Gyoji so radical. It removes the need for motivation. In a culture obsessed with finding your why, this system teaches you that your why doesn't matter. Not after the first few weeks. Not once the system takes over. You don't keep brushing your teeth because you're motivated. You don't need a vision board or a motivational quote to take a shower. You do it because that's who you are. Gyoji applies that principle to everything. Discipline, like hygiene, becomes something so hardwired that the absence of it feels unnatural. And this is what breaks most people's understanding of change. They think discipline is a superpower. It's not. It's a series of tiny decisions executed identically until identity emerges. Rafael didn't wake up one day as a disciplined man. He just stopped skipping days. And when you do that long enough, something happens that no productivity coach, no app, no motivational speaker can explain. You stop asking if, you stop asking when, you stop asking how, you simply do. And that's terrifying to people, because most of the world is still bargaining with itself. Should I skip today? Do I really have time? Am I being too hard on myself? That internal negotiation is the background noise of the average life. But when it goes silent, when the habit becomes a law, you are no longer average. You're no longer relatable. And that's when the criticism starts. People say you've changed, that you're too intense, that it's unhealthy. But that's the cost of crossing the threshold. And Rafael? He paid it gladly. Because he didn't do all this to feel better. He did it to become unrecognizable. That's what transformation is. It's not just behavior modification. It's ego death. It's psychological self-reconstruction. It's the dismantling of every justification you've ever used to explain why you're not where you want to be. And most people are terrified of that. Not because it's painful, but because it works. Because if transformation is that accessible, if it really is just about executing the same simple things every day, without exception, then they have no more excuses. And without excuses, they are forced to confront the truth. It's not that change is hard. It's that they haven't decided yet. But you? You're listening to this because part of you has decided. Maybe not all the way. Maybe not fully. But you've tasted the idea of what life could be like if you stopped negotiating. And now the question is, are you willing to become someone unrecognizable? Because make no mistake, Gyoji will change you. But not in the way a new morning routine does. Not like a productivity hack. Not like a temporary fast or challenge. It will erase the identity you've built through decades of compromise and replace it with something sharper, simpler, stronger. You will become someone who can't skip the work. Not because of guilt, but because you have no relationship to the version of yourself who used to skip. Rafael's 90-day streak wasn't the destination. It was the initiation, the threshold you cross once and never return from. Because once you see what you're capable of without negotiation, without variance, without exception, you can never unsee it. And that's what terrifies the world. Because when you become that consistent, that clear, that unshakable, you stop being normal. And when people say, "That's not normal," that's when you smile. Because you know, normal was the problem. There is a silence that comes not from peace, but from power. It's the silence of someone who no longer debates with themselves, no longer negotiates, no longer seeks external permission to act. It's not arrogance, it's not even confidence in the traditional sense. It's certainty born from repetition so intense it rewires the very structure of the mind. That silence had taken over Rafael. By day 91, his alarm still went off at 5 a.m. He still moved the moment it rang. He still did the same sequence push-ups, meditation, reading without hesitation. But now, there was something different in the air around him. He didn't talk about the routine anymore. He didn't need to. The people closest to him had already adjusted their expectations. He wasn't the guy who was trying to be disciplined. He was discipline. It was no longer a thing he did. It was something he embodied. And yet, this state of transformation, of embodied consistency, doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with discomfort. Because when you become unshakably consistent, you also become painfully aware of how inconsistent the world around you is. You start to notice how often people flinch, how often they explain, how often they delay. You begin to hear the subtle fear in their voice when they say, "You don't have to go so hard," or "You should take a break." They're not talking to you. They're begging for permission to stay comfortable. But Gyoji is the quiet rejection of comfort as a guiding principle. It's not punishment. It's not asceticism for the sake of suffering. It's the radical understanding that freedom doesn't come from doing what you want. It comes from no longer needing to want. This is the turning point where practice evolves into a kind of spiritual armor. You don't just resist the temptations that once derailed you. You stop feeling them. You don't crave variety, because variety is chaos. You don't crave motivation, because motivation is a myth. You don't crave rest, because the discipline is rest. It gives you peace that chaos never will. This is what Dogen meant when he said, "To carry yourself forward and experience myriad things is delusion. That myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening in simpler terms. When you chase the goal, you suffer. When you become the practice, the goal chases you. And this is where Western productivity systems fall apart. They're obsessed with results. Hit this metric, track this number, complete this streak. But the monks never cared about metrics. They cared about the integrity of form, because they knew if you honor the form, the transformation takes care of itself. Western systems are built on willpower. Eastern systems like Gyoji are built on identity dissolution. You don't need to try harder. You need to stop identifying as someone who negotiates. And when that identity dissolves, when the self that postpones, avoids, and re-explains finally dies, what rises in its place is terrifying to the modern world. Someone who doesn't stop, someone who doesn't ask permission, someone who doesn't care how it feels, someone who just is. And at this stage, something strange happens. People stop criticizing you. They've said all they could. They've tried to joke, to warn, to shame. But none of it worked. Now they watch, quietly. Some with envy, some with fear, some with awe. Because consistency at this level becomes not just rare, it becomes sacred. An act of rebellion against the entropy of modern life. And the deeper you go into Gyoji, the more you see how ordinary most people's collapse is. One skip day turns into two. Two becomes a lost week. Then they start again, hoping next time will be different. But without understanding the root problem, it never is. Because the root problem is not motivation. It's the lack of a system that eliminates negotiation. That's what Rafael now understood on a cellular level. He didn't need a reward system. He didn't need a new app. He didn't need better self-talk. He just needed no gap. And that's where the final teaching of Gyoji reveals itself. It's not just about what you do. It's about how you eliminate what you don't. Remove flexibility. Remove choice. Remove debate. You wake up. You move. You execute. You go on with your life. The mental real estate you used to waste on "should I" is now available for something greater. The chaos is gone. The fog has lifted. And what remains? Pure action. Not frantic, not busy, but deliberate, focused, undeniable. This is why monks who follow Gyoji don't burn out. This is why their consistency doesn't come from guilt or shame. It comes from clarity. Clarity that the practice is not about performance, not about proving something to the world, not even about proving something to yourself. It's about removing the need for proof at all. Because once the practice becomes who you are, there is nothing left to argue, nothing left to earn, nothing left to validate, just forward motion. One day, then another, forever. And this, finally, is the difference between someone who tries to be disciplined and someone who is discipline itself. Not normal, not balanced, not moderate, but unbreakable. And that is exactly what the world needs more of. There's a quiet moment, somewhere between day 100 and day 200, where the noise of the world begins to fade. It's not because life gets easier, it doesn't. The stress is still there. The responsibilities remain. People still demand your attention, your time, your compromise. But you have changed. And because of that, the weight of those things feels lighter. Because when your discipline is unbreakable, external chaos doesn't rattle your internal frame. Rafael was now deep into this phase. He no longer felt resistance when the alarm rang. He no longer debated whether today should be a rest day. He didn't dread the cold floor or the mental silence of meditation. The habits had transcended habit. They had become ritual. This is the real distinction, one that few people ever make. Habits are actions. Rituals are identity. A habit can be broken. A ritual, once fused into the self, becomes permanent. But this kind of permanence comes with an invisible cost: isolation. Not because people push you away, but because they stop understanding you. Your routines start to make them feel lazy. Your structure makes them feel unstructured. Your consistency makes their excuses sound hollow in their own heads. They don't say it out loud, but the distance grows. This is one of the hidden consequences of real transformation. You don't just outgrow your habits. You outgrow the people who need them. It's not superiority. It's not elitism. It's the natural divergence of trajectories. When your trajectory is linear, sharp, and intentional, and theirs is erratic, inconsistent, emotionally driven, eventually, you occupy different orbits. And that's when you face one of the final tests of Gyoji. Can you stay committed when your discipline isolates you? Most people can't. They fold under the pressure to soften, to be more balanced, to be more fun, to not make others uncomfortable. But Rafael didn't fold, because by now, the practice was beyond social. It was spiritual, and not in the vague cosmic sense, in the deepest definition of spirituality. The voluntary pursuit of inner order in a world of external disorder. Because here's the truth. We live in a world that rewards comfort, that glorifies moderation, that pathologizes intensity. You're told, don't go too far, don't take it too seriously, don't be so extreme. But those warnings never come from the people you admire. They come from the ones who settled. Gyoji is the quiet refusal to settle, the daily recommitment to a path most people abandon after a few weeks. Not because it's hard, but because it asks too much of who they currently are. But for those who stay, for those who pass through the gates of doubt, distraction, and delay, something extraordinary happens. You become predictable, not in a boring way, in a dangerous way. Because predictable people, those whose behavior you can forecast with precision, become formidable. You know they'll show up. You know they'll execute. You know they won't break under pressure. You know their presence is a constant, not a variable. In geopolitics, these are the actors that shape entire regions. In business, these are the operators that outlast everyone else. In personal development, these are the people whose presence makes excuses disappear. Predictability is power, because in a chaotic world, certainty is currency. When you walk into a room and people feel that your day started at 5 a.m. with meditation and training, when your posture, your tone, your clarity all signal someone who doesn't drift, you change the temperature of every space you enter. And the irony? By the time others start noticing, it's already too late for them to catch up. Because while they were seeking motivation, you were building momentum, and momentum compounds. That's the secret the modern world misses. Gyoji is not about intensity, it's about velocity without variance, movement without deviation. One day at a time, each day indistinguishable from the last. Not because life is dull, but because the core of your day is inviolable. You don't need to wonder how today will begin. It's already decided. Just like tomorrow, just like the day after. And what that gives you, beyond productivity, beyond achievement, is the rarest form of freedom. Freedom from indecision. Think about how much energy you burn wondering, should I work out? When should I start? What should I do? Am I in the right headspace? Those are the questions of a life led by feelings, a life governed by negotiation. But when you eliminate those questions, your energy doesn't disappear. It gets redirected into execution, creation, discipline, clarity. That's why Rafael had more focus at work, more peace at home, more mental bandwidth to think, to feel, to engage. Not because his life got simpler, but because his foundation was now unshakable. That's what Gyoji gives you. Not a life without problems, but a life without fragmentation, where who you are on Monday is the same as who you are on Sunday, where your body doesn't need to be convinced to move, where your mind no longer resists the routine, where the practice doesn't just survive hardship, it thrives in it. And that's when people stop seeing you as committed and start seeing you as inhuman. Because most humans are still governed by impulse, by mood, by circumstance. And when they meet someone who isn't, they don't know what to do with you. They call you names, obsessive, rigid, robotic. But what they really mean is, you are not like me. And that scares me. But to the few, the very few who've walked the same path, or are ready to, you become a lighthouse. Proof that consistency at this level is possible. That structure can become sacred. That predictability can be powerful. That Gyoji doesn't just change your habits, it redefines your humanity. There's a moment in every transformation where the internal shift becomes irreversible. Not because you finished some program, not because you've hit a milestone, not even because you've succeeded. It becomes irreversible because returning to your old self would feel like death. That's where Rafael now stood, at a point of no return. He could remember who he used to be, the guy who couldn't stick to anything for longer than a few weeks, whose enthusiasm burned hot on Mondays and fizzled out by Friday. He could remember, but he could no longer relate. That version of himself wasn't just outdated, it was foreign. This wasn't just behavior change, this was neural architecture redefined. And it happened through the most underestimated force in modern life: boredom. You see, modern systems worship excitement. They assume people won't stick with anything unless it feels new, stimulating, rewarding. So everything is gamified, novel, colorful. New workouts, new diets, new hacks. But the monks knew better. So did Rafael. They knew that boredom is the gateway to mastery, that the discipline doesn't begin until it becomes boring. Because boredom is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that your ego no longer finds this activity impressive, that the dopamine is gone, and now you have to choose. This is the line that separates amateurs from initiates. Most people quit at boredom because they believe progress requires excitement. But the monks, and now Rafael, understand something deeper. Progress lives in the monotony. The discipline you build while no one is watching, while nothing is changing, is the discipline that breaks plateaus and creates breakthroughs. And that is precisely why ritual matters more than variety. In the modern world, we're addicted to stimulation. Our phones buzz, our feeds refresh, our playlists shuffle. We're trained to believe that newness is necessary for engagement. But Gyoji teaches the opposite. That depth is what creates engagement. That doing the same thing, the same way, every day, reveals layers of insight you would never access through novelty. This is what people misunderstand when they say, "You're being too robotic," because they confuse automation with disconnection. But in reality, the opposite is true. True consistency, ritualistic, sacred, unbroken, doesn't numb you. It sharpens you. Every repetition makes you more attuned. You begin to notice subtle changes in your breath, your posture, your thoughts. You see the edges of your impatience, the patterns of your distraction, the moments your ego tries to reassert control. This is the battlefield of real transformation. Not dramatic moments, but microscopic ones. The moment you want to stop 5 push-ups short but don't. The moment you want to skip meditation because your mind is noisy but sit anyway. The moment your schedule gets disrupted but your practice finds a way. These are the invisible victories that create visible power. And this is why so few people ever reach that final transformation. Because there's no applause for these wins, no validation, no dopamine. Just proof, quiet and relentless, that you are no longer who you used to be. This is what the world doesn't understand about obsession. When you begin to operate at this level, people start using words like extreme, unsustainable, or unhealthy. But what they really mean is this: you remind them of what they could be if they stopped choosing comfort. And that's threatening. Because consistency at this level exposes not just weakness, it exposes excuses. It reveals that discipline isn't a personality trait. It's a choice, made day after day, until it's no longer a decision, it's a default. And once that default locks in, it creates momentum that's almost impossible to stop. That's the stage Rafael had entered, where people around him stopped giving advice and started asking for it. Where his routines didn't just affect his mornings, but reshaped his entire calendar. Where the practice no longer asked anything from him, but gave everything to him. More time, more clarity, more energy, more self-respect. Because that's the part no one talks about. Not the pride of results, not the pride of streaks. The deep, inner certainty that comes from knowing you no longer abandon yourself. Every day that Rafael honored his practice, was a day he didn't betray the person he said he would become. And that more than any habit tracker or productivity tool is what creates lasting identity change. This is the heart of Gyoji, the death of the negotiator within you, the birth of the practitioner, because that's the final transformation. When you are no longer someone chasing goals, you are someone inhabiting a path. You are no longer a person trying to be disciplined, you are discipline itself. And at that point, the world can no longer predict you, because you are no longer reactive. You're no longer driven by circumstance, convenience, or emotion. You are no longer made of glass. You are stone, still, solid, unbreakable. And people will ask you, how did you do it? They'll search for hacks, shortcuts, secrets. But there will be no secret to give. Because Gyoji doesn't operate on secrets. It operates on silence, on stillness, on days stacking into decades without a single mental negotiation. And you'll look at them and say what Rafael could now say without hesitation. I didn't do it. I became it. By now, Rafael wasn't counting days anymore. There was no celebration at day 120, no reward system, no milestone badge. Because when you live through Gyoji, you don't measure success in days past, you measure it in days no longer negotiated. The world teaches you to track progress externally. How many pounds lost? How many books finished? How many habits streaked? But the monks don't track days. They track interruptions. And if there are none, if the practice continues seamlessly, quietly, without disruption, then that is the highest form of success. Because it means the transformation has completed its final phase. From effort to execution, from execution to embodiment, from embodiment to essence. And when something becomes essence, you can no longer separate the person from the practice. Rafael had become the kind of person people talk about, but rarely meet. The one who shows up no matter what. The one whose word means something, even when no one is watching. The one whose life moves with a sense of rhythm that's immune to randomness. And this is where the conversation shifts away from discipline as effort and into discipline as philosophy. Because Gyoji isn't just about waking up early or doing push-ups or meditating at the same time every day. It's about what happens to your worldview when your life is built on patterns that are no longer emotional. It reorders your values. You stop chasing outcomes and start respecting process. You stop needing variation and start craving precision. You stop measuring productivity in hours worked and start measuring it in moments honored. And that reordering doesn't just make you more effective, it makes you more dangerous. Why? Because the person who can keep moving forward without external validation is almost impossible to stop. That's the power of internal authority. You don't need motivation from a YouTube video. You don't need accountability from a friend. You don't need the weather to be right or your mood to be ideal. Because the decision to act was already made weeks, months, maybe years ago. This is why monks don't skip practice during war, famine, or natural disaster. It's not because they're superhuman. It's because they made a vow, and that vow eliminated the question. No matter the condition, the bell rings. And when the bell rings, they sit. No thinking, no convincing, just movement. This is where Rafael now found himself. The alarms he once needed, he now anticipated. The routines he once had to fight for, he now protected. But more than anything, he had become someone others depended on. Not because he said yes to everything, not because he was always available, but because when he did say yes, he showed up. In a world where people cancel, delay, or flake at the slightest friction, someone who shows up every time becomes invaluable. And that's the paradox. The more internally consistent you become, the more externally trusted you are. Because consistency builds reliability, and reliability builds power. That power doesn't come from force. It doesn't come from domination. It comes from stillness, from the unshakable presence of someone who knows exactly what they'll do today, before the day even begins. And that kind of presence terrifies people, because it reveals something deep and uncomfortable, that most of what we call choice is actually just avoidance. That most of what we label balance is just the inability to commit. That most of what we excuse as self-care is just permission to remain inconsistent. Rafael had seen through all of it, not by reading 100 books, not by attending seminars, but by doing the same 20-minute ritual every single day until his identity was purified by repetition. And now, others had started asking questions. How do you stay so focused? What keeps you going? Don't you ever get tired? And he would tell them the truth, knowing full well most of them wouldn't want to hear it. You think I'm disciplined. I'm not. I just don't negotiate anymore. And that was it. No grand secret, no motivational playlist, just the elimination of mental friction. But even in that clarity, there was one more truth, one last layer of Gyoji that no one talks about. It's what happens when your discipline becomes so consistent, so unbreakable, that even you start to question it. Not because it's hard, but because it's so seamless, it becomes invisible. And invisibility can be dangerous, because it tempts you to stop honoring the ritual, to treat it as ordinary, to skip just this once, not out of laziness, but out of pride. I've done this for 200 days. I deserve a break. This one exception won't matter. But this is how the decay begins. Gyoji warns against this. Dogen himself wrote, "Even a single day of broken practice invites the return of old demons." Because once you forget that the practice is sacred, you risk losing what made you unbreakable in the first place. So Rafael, now fully transformed, did what only the masters do. He began again. He recommitted, rewrote his declaration, reaffirmed his time, re-entered the form. Because he understood, the moment you believe you're finished, you're already falling behind. Discipline is not a destination. It's a daily decision. And even when it becomes second nature, especially when it does, you must continue to protect it as if it's your first day. That's the paradox. The stronger your practice becomes, the more fragile it is to neglect. Because it no longer needs effort, it needs reverence. And reverence is rare. But that's the price of mastery. Not constant improvement, not chasing growth, but the willingness to repeat the same sacred thing forever, knowing that you've already arrived and still choosing to begin again. Rafael's journey was no longer about sheer willpower or fleeting motivation. It had evolved into something far deeper, a spiritual discipline anchored in relentless consistency and unwavering identity. But even as he embraced this unbreakable rhythm, the world around him continued to throw unexpected challenges his way. It was no longer about resisting the first weeks of discomfort or battling internal resistance. He had mastered that. The new test was endurance through chaos, unpredictability, and the weight of external pressures. One evening, Rafael received news that his company was undergoing massive restructuring. His position was uncertain, his workload increased dramatically, and stress levels soared. For many, this would be a moment to crumble, to abandon routines in favor of survival mode. But for Rafael, the opposite happened. Instead of allowing the upheaval to derail his practice, he doubled down. His morning ritual became a sanctuary amid the storm, a predictable anchor to a world in flux. The same 20 push-ups, the same meditation, the same reading. No excuses, no variation, just the unshakable commitment to his vow. This is the true power of Gyoji, the ability to turn discipline into a refuge, a quiet fortress against the chaos of modern life. Psychologists confirm this phenomenon. Studies show that when people establish strong routines, especially those linked to identity and supported by public accountability, they experience higher resilience to stress. They regulate emotions better, maintain clearer focus, and recover faster from setbacks. In other words, consistency isn't just about habit formation, it's about mental and emotional survival. Rafael's co-workers began noticing. "You seem calmer," they said. "How are you handling all this pressure?" He simply replied, "I'm just showing up." But beneath the surface, something profound was happening. Rafael was no longer the man who tried and failed. He was now the man who simply was a living embodiment of his discipline. This transformation radiated beyond his morning ritual. It influenced his decision-making, his relationships, his approach to challenges. He became more intentional in his words, more decisive in his actions, and more patient with setbacks. His girlfriend, once skeptical, started joining him occasionally in his morning sessions, inspired by his unwavering dedication. His friends, who called him robotic, began to respect the fierce consistency that others only admired from afar. Yet, this level of discipline came with its own sacrifices. Social invitations were declined, late nights were replaced by early mornings, and comfort zones were dismantled. Rafael understood the price, but accepted it willingly, because what he was gaining was far greater a rebirth of his very self. He became a living testament to an ancient truth. Disruption is inevitable, but surrender is optional. And in this truth lies the ultimate secret to mastery, not the myth of perfect motivation or effortless success, but the courage to continue regardless of circumstances, fueled by an identity so solid that external chaos cannot fracture it. But Rafael's story is not unique. Across history, from Zen monks to elite athletes, from entrepreneurs to artists, the most consistent individuals share this invisible thread, an identity forged in the crucible of commitment, unshaken by the storms of life. They understand that discipline is not an act, it is a state of being. This is why the Gyoji method transcends mere habit formation. It's a profound system of self-redefinition. By public declaration, fixed scheduling, unwavering repetition, and pre-solving obstacles, you don't just build habits, you reconstruct your identity. This is the metamorphosis from I want to I am. And that, perhaps, is the most valuable lesson Rafael learned, the one that transforms lives beyond measure. Are you ready to take the first step? To declare your intention publicly? To lock in your time? To commit to repetition so profound that it alters your very being? Because once you do, you don't just change your habits, you change your destiny. The final phase of Rafael's transformation was not simply about maintaining discipline. It was about embodying it so fully that it became inseparable from who he was. He had crossed the threshold from habit holder to habitual being. What the Gyoji system offers is more than a tool. It is a total overhaul of your internal ecosystem. It rewires your brain, reshapes your identity, and shifts the very narrative you tell yourself every day. This transformation is echoed in the latest neuroscience research. Experts explain that the basal ganglia, the part of the brain responsible for habit formation, don't just store routines, they encode identity. When you repeat an action long enough, the behavior becomes so deeply embedded that it defines who you are. The question is no longer, will I do it today? But simply, who am I if I don't? This shift eliminates the exhausting mental negotiation that plagues so many people. The struggle to maintain discipline becomes obsolete because the practice is no longer a choice, it's an instinct. Rafael's consistency had evolved into this level of automaticity by day 90. He woke up early, moved through his push-ups, meditation, and reading without hesitation, without even fully registering the action in his conscious mind. His practice was a seamless extension of his identity. The impact rippled through every facet of his life. He found himself more focused at work, less reactive in conflict, and more present with the people he cared about. The practice was no longer a task, it was a source of strength. But the true power of Gyoji lies beyond personal transformation. It is a discipline that creates ripples, impacting families, communities, and workplaces by modeling what unbreakable consistency looks like. Imagine the geopolitical and economic implications when leaders, entrepreneurs, and citizens adopt such relentless focus. Countries that cultivate a culture of Gyoji in their workforce experience higher productivity, innovation, and resilience. Businesses that embed this system in their teams see improved morale, sharper execution, and sustained growth. On a global scale, the ripple effects can be transformative, lifting economies, stabilizing societies, and nurturing environments where progress is steady and unstoppable. Yet, this system demands a stark truth. Transformation isn't comfortable. It requires sacrifice, discomfort, and the willingness to confront the death of your old self. Rafael's story is a blueprint, not a myth. His struggle, setbacks, and ultimate success are a reflection of what's possible when you commit fully to the practice without gaps. The Gyoji system is not for the faint-hearted. It's for those who understand that true mastery is forged through relentless, unyielding consistency that scares others. This level of discipline might alienate friends, unsettle family, and invite skepticism. But as Rafael learned, that discomfort is a signpost. It marks the boundary between ordinary and extraordinary. When you hear people say, "That's not normal," or "You're obsessed," remember that you're crossing into a new realm where ordinary rules no longer apply. Consistency that scares others is the only consistency worth having. So, what will your public declaration be? What habit are you ready to own so fully that it reshapes who you are? The answer lies within the Gyoji system. Declare it publicly, lock in your schedule, commit to unwavering repetition, and pre-solve your obstacles. Do this, and you won't just build a habit, you will become unbreakable. And when you do, others will look at you with the same awe and fear that Rafael's community once did. They'll wonder, how does he do that? You won't have to explain, because you won't be doing it. You will simply be. If this video has changed how you think about discipline and consistency, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Share your public declaration in the comments below, and let's create a community of unbreakable people. Remember, the discipline that frightens others is the discipline that transforms you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.